Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. So I'm in a spicy mood, as you might be able to tell from the title of this video. And yes, we are going to be talking about some champions that I would like to personally see nerfed. Now, before we dive into this, I do want to preface and say that these are, of course, just my personal opinions. This is not any position of playerium. This is not necessarily predicting what they are going to do. These are just my opinions, so you can feel free to agree or disagree with anything that I say in this video. Now, this topic kind of popped back into my head with the most recent fusion in the game, that being Titus Blackplume, and kind of, discussing or seeing how much damage he can put out in a shield growth style of teams, infinity style teams. As most of us know by now, when you pair him with a Brogni or a Wixwell in an infinity shield team, you stack up a giant shield, which is capped to a certain point, but nonetheless, he does damage equal to some value proportion of the shield that's on him, so he can do lots of damage, particularly against clan bosses, longer fights where infinity style teams can work. And so for me personally, he's definitely a champion who itches that scratch of feeling a little bit too powerful for their own good, at least for the sake of game balance. And I guess I should expound a little bit more on that, what I mean by that. When I say game balance, I think that it's best to have a balanced game, meaning that there's not standout champions who are ridiculously overpowered compared to their peers. That's not to say that there can't be a solid meta where certain champions are better than others, depending on who you might have. I think that diversity is good in that way, where you can have multiple champions that can kind of compete for the best, depending upon the other champions around them and or the gear that you put on your champions, which are variables between accounts, of course. But I don't like when you have an outstanding outlier that's ridiculously powerful and should probably not be that powerful, because it can get boring, it can get stale, it can also get very, very annoying. And a great example of this would be Titus and Marichka. When they first came out, we all kind of agreed that they were somewhat a little bit overpowered. They didn't have a counter for at least like a year or so, and they completely dominated the PvP meta, and everyone absolutely hated it after a while. Every single offense was Titus and Marichka, every single defense was Titus and Marichka, and it was abysmal, right? So it can get most certainly stale just by having a very stagnant meta where certain champions are just the most powerful in the game, and there's really not much you can do about it to compete or to beat it. So with all that context out of the way, let's dive into the meat and potatoes of this video. The way I've organized this is that I'm going to give you guys a cold take, a medium take, and a hot take. And a cold take means that champions that you would probably agree, let me know again in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree, of course, but my cold take should be champions that you probably agree that should be nerfed. And I'm not just going to say they should be nerfed, I'm actually going to talk about what I would change or what I would like to see changed about them, and to nerf them and to bring their power level down to something that's more tolerable and not necessarily overpowered, again, in my opinion. Medium take is kind of maybe like 50-50. Some people might agree, some people might disagree. And then a hot take probably will piss off some people to even express the opinion, and we'll definitely get to those later. But yeah, a hot take is definitely champions that I personally would like to see nerfed, but I think most people would not want to see nerfs. Again, you can tell me your responses in the comments. So let's start things off with you guys on my good side with the cold takes, and there will be 2 champions per category. So the first champion we're going to discuss is from the Barbarians, and you probably already know who we're talking about based off that preface, but it is, of course, Armand's the Magnificent. Now, when he came out, I definitely expressed my disdain for his power level, especially after seeing what he could do. He's definitely one of the most powerful PvE and PvP champions in the game, to the point where I think still to this day, he has like the highest ban rate in all of Live Arena, at least in the higher levels of Live Arena. And yeah, he's still a menace even to this day. He's picked a lot less as you get higher and higher in like Gold 3, Gold 4 Live Arena, just because there are even more powerful options, which is definitely hard to admit, but nonetheless, he gets less and less picked as you go higher up. But nonetheless, for most of us, he's the most accessible broken champion that we all have access to. But of course, the main thing that kind of makes him broken is just the sheer power level of the A2 here, which will steal 100% of the turn meter from every single target, basically granting him an extra turn unless your entire team is in Stone Skin, and then he will place a stun on you or on your enemies for 1 turn, meaning that he will essentially take another turn. He could either use the A3 or the A1, which gives him more turn meter, but by the time that you get around to your turn, you miss your turn because you're stunned, and then by the time he gets around back to his turn, he can then use the A2 again and keep you in a perpetual loop of being stunned and locked out and not being able to do anything, which is of course very annoying and very stupid in my opinion, that exists in the game. So how would I fix this guy? Definitely needs a nerf in my opinion. So one of the things that I would suggest is that we make this a 5-turn cooldown, books down to 4, so that at least he will have 2 turns after he takes the double turn from stealing all turn meter and maybe going for the sheep or going for the A1 doesn't really matter. But essentially what that change would buy you is that turn where you get stunned, you have the next turn afterward where he does not yet have the ability to steal all your turn meter again. Therefore, you could have some sort of response, albeit 3 turns later relative to him, but you would be able to take a turn after you're free of the stun to do something to combat the situation versus being stuck in a perpetual loop of control. Option 2 would be just to reduce this from stealing all turn meter to reducing or stealing 50% of your target's turn meter. That would still give him an extra turn because he's stealing 50% from, let's say 4 targets in the arena. That's 200% turn meter, so he would still go next. But you as the enemy would be a lot less debilitated by that because you've only lost half of your turn meter instead of all of it, basically resetting your turn meter down to 0 and thus guaranteeing that he will continuously lap you. Option 3 would be the most aggressive of all, which would be combining options 1 and 2. So it would be a 4-turn cooldown when booked, on top of it being also stealing only 50% of the turn meter. Then that would have a combined effect of just making him a lot less oppressive when it comes to his use cases in situations. Now, I also think that would nerf his power level in PvE, but you could argue that his power level is too high in PvE, just being able to permanently lock out waves. Granted, enemy combatants and waves of PvE content are a lot slower than what you're going to encounter in the arena, so even having those nerfs on him wouldn't really impact his ability to control waves that much, just because he'd be so much faster than the waves that he would still lap them anyway, so it really wouldn't change anything in PvE, which is kind of my goal around these nerf suggestions, just to maintain somewhat of his power level in PvE, but kind of lower it dramatically in PvP. That way you wouldn't be as scared and you wouldn't have to automatically ban an Armons every time he pops up, for example, in live arena. Champion number 2 for the cold takes is the bane of high level live arena, or just high level arena in general. At least what people say is the bane of their existence, and that being Nice, the Shadow Thief. And definitely mainly in form 2, where once he is unleashed in this form, he is extremely difficult to kill because he has a protected block damage on himself as well as a self cleanse, and then the counterattack means that even if you poke him, he will counterattack, and that could potentially kill you. And of course, synergize with his revive, where anytime he kills someone, he can revive people on your team. So he can be very, very oppressive even as a one-man army, or especially as a one-man army, because he increases a bunch of stats when enemy or allies are dead. Now, in fairness, as a very, very fortunate person who happens to have a Nice the Shadow Thief, he can be countered in a handful of ways, so he's not all powerful compared to like Armons, for example, but nonetheless, he is still very annoying and very effective when he does work. But nonetheless, I think most people would agree that his power level is perhaps a little bit too high. And the changes that I would propose for him was that you'd have a passive part, which is the increasing of the stats, and then you'd have the active part, which is reviving a random enemy, or a random ally with 50% HP, 50% turn meter. So I would say you put this aspect on a cooldown. So either 2 turns or 3 turns. And 1 might be a little bit still too egregious, but it could also still work, just because he wouldn't be able to counterattack every time and kill 3 people and then revive 3 people. He would have to get another turn before he could revive someone. So just putting it on some form of cooldown, could be 1, could be 2, could be up to 3. 3 would be a little bit perhaps extreme and lower his power level, but again, that's kind of the intent. But that would be the first option for the change to the kit to kind of bring his power level down. Option 2 would be even kind of more severe, or make it more situational, where the passive, or he only gets the revive aspect if he gets the kill with a counterattack. So it has to synergize with the A3. You attack him when he has counterattack, he counterattacks and kills you, and then that's the only time where you get revived during a counterattack, not just if he takes a turn and kills you, or he uses the AoE and kills a bunch of people. Now let's turn up the heat a little bit and move on to the medium takes. Again, this is meant to be what I project would be kind of 50-50. Some people would want to see it and some people would not want to see these style of nerfs. So the first champion is going to be from the dwarves, and you might be able to guess who it is based off that distinction, and that is of course the lovely Trunda, who's still the queen of Hydra, at least at the very, very high end in terms of gear capabilities and I guess spending habits, to be fair. But yeah, Trunda Gilt Mallet, very, very powerful, very, very broken, especially the A2 here. Now again, coming from the stance of game balance, my primary problem with Trunda's A2 is that it literally does not not do what it says. It says it attacks one enemy, then attacks all other enemies with a second hit, dealing 60% of the damage inflicted of the first hit and ignoring 50% of the target's defense. So the problem with this is how, a surplus splash damage kind of works in the game, but regardless, I'll distill it down to the fact that it is not less damage, it does more. If it did what it says, 60% of the initial hit, that would mean that the second hit would always deal less damage than the initial hit, but as we have definitely seen in Hydra and other examples, it deals more damage, which means it's literally not doing 60%. So either we could just kind of fix that whole aspect where it's actually 60%, meaning it's a lower value, meaning that you're not going to automatically blow up every single Hydra head after the first hit. Or personally, the change I would like to see is that we change this into a Wukong Siegfried style of ability where the second hit is only if you kill the target, which would absolutely, and I fully admit this, would completely kill her viability in Hydra Clan Boss. But I honestly don't believe that is a bad thing. But again, you could disagree with me in the comments and whatnot, but personally I don't think she should do much in Hydra. Maybe she can be super strong with the burn and stuff and do something more with that, rework the kit, or maybe this can become kind of like the Thor ability where it attacks each head individually and it kind of bypasses their AoE damage reduction thing or whatnot. It could be something like that, or honestly I just think it would be nice to have her be another Wukong style champion where she can just kind of one-shot people in an arena context, but not necessarily one-shot a bunch of Hydra heads because of just splash damage based off the first hit. The second champion from the medium take category is in the Shadowkin faction, and you might think she's somewhat of a corollary to the other champion here, which might give it away there, but it is, of course, Yumiko. So Yumiko, more specifically double Yumiko, is kind of the problem that I have, i.e. the resetting of reset abilities. So we've all seen that. It used to be broken with the original iteration of the Trunda teams, but now it's a little bit less so. There's different combinations of champions that make Trunda work better, at least in the current meta for Hydra. But nonetheless, it still exists in the game where you can have double Yumiko and you can reset your resets and be stuck in a perpetual loop of always using your active abilities, which again, I don't think that's a healthy thing for the game. It also came into effect with perma-taunt teams, so to speak, and that's probably why they ended up nerfing taunt relative to Hydra, which is a part of the changes I didn't really agree with. I kind of like the idea where you could use taunt to kind of draw the aggro of the consumption of the heads, but unfortunately people were abusing that by having some sort of resetting of resets and having perma-taunt teams where you literally could not get devoured at all because you would infinitely stack your taunt on a champion who's not the one going to be devoured, and thus no one would ever be devoured because it's another iteration of kind of those infinity style teams. So again, I think that problem could have been solved in a completely different way, which is disallow, or option one here, disallow the resetting of reset abilities. And honestly, this already somewhat exists in the game in places you might not even realize. So a good example of this is Prince Kaimar, where we can see the reset here. This skill's cooldown cannot be reduced or reset, which is kind of not true. It cannot be reset by a Kaimar, but it obviously can be reset by Yumiko. And again, I would be opposing that interaction, so to speak, where you can reset abilities. Now, it does actually exist in the form that I would perfectly like on one of the more recent Void Legendaries that was added to the game, which is a Fighty Tealcrest here, where it explicitly says the cooldown of this skill cannot be decreased by other cooldown decreasing effects. And that is the sentence that I want on basically every single reset champion in the game. So you cannot reset abilities, which would change the meta for sure, but it would also get rid of a lot of the stacking of abilities problems that we have going on in the game right now. However, I will extend an olive branch. Option 2 would be that it's the same thing, but you can only decrease the reset of reset abilities by 1 turn, which would in turn kind of protect people who like to use their triple Painkeeper teams and whatnot, because she has a similar ability, but it's only 1 turn. So that would be an olive branch that I would extend to the public. Again, these are my opinions. It's not necessarily the player I'm going to do this, so don't be forewarned about that. But it would say that basically this can only have its skill cooldown reduced by 1 turn. Something like this would be kind of the meet people in the middle where they get abuse it a little bit, but you'd have to stack your team with a bunch of reset champions to continuously reset an entire team, which I think is more balanced, because at that point you're sacrificing so much of the team to get all these resets, and it wouldn't be worth it in most instances, but it would still work in the case of like Iron Twins. Now let's dial it up all the way to 11 and talk talk about my hot takes. Again, these are the takes that you probably will disagree with, but nonetheless, I do have some opinions on some champions that are definitely too powerful, despite their popularity. So the first one is going to be a skinwalker, and you might not know who it is. You might know who it is, but believe it or not, I personally think that Marius is too strong. He's definitely strong in the arena. He's definitely strong in PvE, and I of course use him in both areas to some degree, but I do think he's a little bit too powerful. It's a good thing that he's free and accessible and everyone can have him, but for me, for the sake of game balance, I don't like the fact that you look at a lot of the teams for PvE and it's just Marius teams, just Marius and Newt and just kind of resetting that and just blasting through waves, blasting through the bosses. To me, it's boring, and I don't really like that aspect of the game where just one champion kind of dominates all areas of the game single-handedly, and he's just the best champion in the game. But what I would do is I would say that Marius should be strong as a arena champion. I think that's where he probably should have been more focused on. I like the enfeeble aspect of the A1. I like the counterattack to counter mythicals. I like the immunity to turn meter reduction, which is good like against Armons or other champions like that, Shuzens, or just turn meter reduction effects in general, decrease speed, immune to that. I think, he would have been best served in PvP circumstances more so than PvE. I like the A2. You can decrease, it's a polymorph proof buff strip, which can be very effective. So I liked his kit centered more so around the arena. I don't like the fact that this is an enemy max HP. So my first option, which would be the most aggressive in this case, would be to just get rid of the enemy max HP from the A2. I know, controversial, but again, these are just my opinions. You don't have to agree. But yeah, I would like to see this removed. I think a triple hitter AoE enemy max HP hit is too much. I think it was fine on Newt because it's a single target, which means that yes, he's more powerful than Acrizia, who does it. A double hitter is the best she can do, but Newt does it on triple hitter, but it was on a single target. So in Hydra, he can work, but he wasn't as effective. In Chimera, it was still strong. In PvP, basically non-existent, right? But my point is that Newt is kind of somewhat limited to single target boss encounters, and that's where he can definitely shine with a triple hitter max HP, which again, it could be argued that shouldn't really exist either, but he's not on the list for this video. But I think having it be a triple hitter AoE is a little bit too powerful. So again, the most aggressive option would be to remove it altogether, but I think once again, an olive branch would be just let the first two hits be enemy max HP and the third one just scale off of his defense. That way that he would be effectively on the same level as an Acrizia, who's also avoid legendary, who's harder obviously to get because you'd have to get lucky to get her. But they would kind of bring their power levels to be equivalent, where Acrizia has enemy max HP on every single hit, and she does have an AoE double hitter, and this would be another AoE double hitter in terms of the enemy max HP element. That way they're on the same level, so that Acrizia and Marius can kind of do the same thing in different areas, and we don't have one outstanding champion who's just the best of the best across all aspects of the game. And then the last champion for the video and the last champion for the hot takes is, of course, Mr. Lightsaber himself, that being Siegfried. We kind of touched on this with Trunda, so it should be no surprise that I have a similar opinion on Siegfried and the absolute cannon that is the A3 here. They obviously gave him a buff way back when, it made this ability ignore 50% of the defense, which brought it to a completely broken level. But yeah, essentially what I would do with this, well, my first option would be fix the game, make surplus actually surplus. For those who don't know, I'll explain it a little bit. Essentially what happens is that you have an initial hit and it does some amount of damage, and then you have some surplus damage, which is the remainder that you would have dealt had the target not died. But it doesn't just stop there. That extra amount of that surplus gets re-multiplied by the multipliers of the skill. It gets multiplied by books amplifying the damage. It gets multiplied by masteries and everything else, and crit damage as well if it's a critical hit. And so it just gets to some ridiculous level that is once again not the remainder of the damage. It's some multiplication of the remainder of the damage. And that's why you get these crazy numbers where you kill a target, you do 200,000 damage, say for example, and then you hit everyone else for 5 million or whatever a crazy Siegfried build does. The numbers don't make any sense. So that would be my first option, is fix the surplus damage. Unfortunately, that would cause some collateral damage. That would mean that Baron's A1 wouldn't work the way it does. That would mean that Wukong wouldn't work the way it was. So again, that might be too aggressive. Most people probably wouldn't be a fan of that. So the olive branch would be, of course, just making this not crit, which would bring its power level. He would still be probably, I think multiplier wise, he would still be higher than Wukong, but he would be in the same realm where he's somewhat scary carry. Of course, a Wukong can finish off your team when when someone's really low or really squishy, but in a lot of cases you can tank a hit from a Wukong. You can definitely not tank a hit from a Siegfried, and that's kind of why I feel he's a little bit too powerful. So making the ability just not crit, or making the surplus damage not critical, would at least counter or take care of the crit damage multiplier, which is of course a stat that we can build on our champion. So a Siegfried with 400% crit damage wouldn't matter because the excess damage wouldn't crit, therefore he would do a lot less damage. Therefore you could potentially survive the hit and not have your entire team wiped by one champion taking one turn. Also, it would get rid of the fact that he's now a wave clearing king, where you can just one shot one enemy combatant and then the entire wave dies. You can one shot bosses single-handedly with like a Shuzan and stuff like that. Again, I don't think that should be possible. I know it's fun for the people who use it. You can get a 2-second run on Amius or whatever and just kind of one-shot him, but should that really exist in the game for the sake of game balance? In my opinion, no. So let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with any and all of these takes, and let me know if you want to do kind of the mirror of this video where I talk about champions that I would like to see buffs. Maybe some champions that obviously need buffs and some champions who I would still like to see buffs even though they're not the most ones in need of it. So let me know all of your thoughts on this video in the comment section down below, and I will be sure to check out the analytics on this video to see what the like and dislike ratio is, to see if people definitely disagree with my hot takes here that I've expressed in this video. So as always, if you did enjoy this video, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you enjoy the content overall on this channel, then feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well. If you did not enjoy the video, then feel free to, you can hit the dislike button, or you can just let me have it in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching and have a good one.